Hello and welcome everyone to yet another episode of Fintech Pioneers. Today we have a unique situation. We are not just going to talk on Fintech Pioneers, but we are also going to talk about Cryptonomy Talks. We have combined both the talk shows together for one unique guest that we have today. It's none other than Wai Lum, who is also the managing director and very senior person at ADGM. More importantly, he's truly one of the pioneers both in the sector of fintech as well as crypto economy, and an influencer not just in the region but in a much wider global world. So Wai Lum, welcome to our show, and it's quite special for us, and thank you so much for agreeing to have a chat with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Wai Lum, it would be great if you can start with you telling us a bit about yourself, your personal journey, and how you ended up in the world of fintech and cryptonomy and your role in influencing it.
Right. Where do I begin? Actually, I wouldn't have foreseen myself in this situation if you asked me that question 20 years ago, because I started off as an engineer, right, working in an incineration plant. I'm an engineer by training. And that was part of my stint with the Ministry of the Environment. Back then, looking at the environmental policies, solid waste management, water conservation, energy conservation, climate change, etc., etc. Now, my interest in finance came about when I was working on a divestment project to divest government assets, to privatize those assets. And that opportunity gave me that interaction with project financiers, bankers, M&A operators, and sort of got me fascinated about the finance world. So when my sort of bond with the Ministry of the Environment ended, I was looking around, and a friend of mine sort of met me and got me excited about the work with the Monetary Authority of Singapore. Right, so there I made a huge jump into financial regulation, and the rest is history. Right? So I spent about 11 years with the MES before I joined ADGM in June 2015, and I've been with them since for about 7 years now.
Awesome. And what has been your journey in last 7 years? Because last 7 years, it's a massive change in our industry globally, right? We saw the rise of tech, then came fintechs, then came crypto, and now we are talking DeFi. And there is also element of AI, machine learning. All of this massive change has happened in our industry in a very, very short span of time. So how has been your journey in this short span of time?
It's been nothing short of exciting. I remember back in 2015 when we first started, fintech wasn't really a word that was bandied around. It was very new. Of course, we do have fintechs happening in UK, Singapore, so some developments there. But you look at this region, it was hardly prevalent. So back then, when we first started the International Financial Center, we had an amazing opportunity to rethink and reimagine how we want to build our rules and regulations, how we're going to set up our financial center. And definitely, we recognize that the future of finance will be technology enabled. So we started from scratch, setting out a fintech strategy. And for me, I've never been in fintech before, but that was really a culture shock, thrown at the deep end of the pool. My boss asked me to set up a fintech strategy, and I basically have to look around the world to see what's happening and adapt what is appropriate in this space, in this region. I think one of the biggest decisions that was the turning point back then was the introduction of the regulatory sandbox. That, although in concept it's a very simple concept now, that we want to introduce a framework where we can interact with fintechs, work with them, help them scale and adapt to the regulatory requirements as they scale. But that opportunity allowed us to get up close with the fintechs, interacting with them, understanding their business risks. And through that engagement process, we also got to be a lot more sophisticated. And in due course, we are able to fine-tune, calibrate our rules, develop new ones, throw away irrelevant ones. And today, you look at ADGM, it has a comprehensive set of regulations governing the whole host of digital financial services. So I would say yes, the last 7 years have been quite fortuitous for me in understanding this space. And at the same time, I got a lot of help from capable colleagues that believe in the same vision.
And I think, well, what has been unique also is, and it's quite evident now, right, that ADGM has consistently seemed to have identified the future and has been able to come up with regulations well ahead of its time. Right? Crypto is a classic example, Fintech was a classic example, where within the region at least, you were one of the first ones to come up with those regulations. And I also wanted to check, how does that work with a wider global community? Does the collaboration happen at a wider global community as well?
Yes, I think we can never operate in silos. Whatever we do here, as a responsible regulator, we are part of global standard setting bodies. We need to be plugged in to know what is the developments in that space. Because whatever we do here, we need to align and make sure that there's no regulatory arbitrage with one jurisdiction to the other jurisdiction. And that is something which we need to do in order to maintain our credibility as an international financial center as well. Because in order for businesses to come into our region, they need to also sometimes get their approvals from the home jurisdiction. And if the home regulators over there does not recognize our status, it makes things a lot difficult. So definitely, as responsible corporate citizen of the world, we do need to make sure that our rules and regulations are in line with the best international practices. What is perhaps unique about our situation is because we are new, we are able to start from scratch. We are not only just able to bring the best practice, we are also able to leapfrog and think ahead.
So, Wai Lum, help us understand, what, according to you, is the likely future of finance? How would you see it in next 5 years, 10 years, the world of financial sector evolving?
No doubt, technology will be a centerpiece. And I mean, for obvious reasons, so technology has been a driver in other verticals as well, improving efficiencies, offering greater consumer choices. So it's the innovation-led economy, right?
Yeah.
The last 5 years has been very much technology disrupting and gradually complementing in what is happening in the traditional financial sector.
Yep.
And I think that's the sustainable model going forward. And over time, startups, in order for them to have a meaningful deployment and have a more impactful deployment, they really need to look at the large institutions to help them a multiplier effect. And likewise, for big financial institutions, they have no choice but to look to the more agile startups for solutions to address their pain points. So I think in the traditional, now we use the word traditional for fintech, right? It used to be that guy, right? Yeah, but I will use the word traditional fintech space. You see greater collaboration, and that will probably be the way to go forward. Now with blockchain-enabled services, crypto has been around for a while now. They're still, in a way, sometimes looking for the killer application, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I suppose the technology itself so far has proven very beneficial in a lot of the sectors. But when it comes to the financial sector, being a very heavily regulated space, the penetration and adoption has been somewhat more challenging. And of course, the nature of financial transactions in this modern era is that it's so high volume, so fast. The blockchain technology might not be yet ready to cater to this speed and frequency of transactions. So I think the technology is still sort of playing catch up to adapt to the nature of financial services. But certainly in the last 3 years, crypto has really caught the attention of the traditional financial services. And you see banks embracing that in a bigger way now, exploring that in a bigger way. institutional investors are looking into this space, because gradually we're introducing regulations into this space.
While earlier today you were mentioning about bringing transparency in the world of crypto, right? And there seems to be a very huge resistance towards bringing transparency in the space of crypto. What are your views on it, and why do you believe transparency is needed? And how do you think it's going to actually get implemented, making sure that industry feels comfortable with it, at the same time we make it more secure?
Right. I'll qualify the word transparency in the sense that there's always transparency of transactions, there's transparency of identity, right? I think where there is the greatest concern around crypto is actually in transparency of identity. So the position that we take is that anonymity is probably not sustainable in the long run, right? And there are two reasons for that. Today, there are market abuses in the sector, and people are using the anonymous nature of blockchain to conduct financial crime. So that is something which I think you and I can agree that it is not tenable. We need to regulate this thing. So my position as a regulator is that while it's tough for the industry to acknowledge that, they should start thinking about how to move to a more sustainable model where identifiability is the center stage. Identifiability is the foundation of the business model.
And as you see more and more crypto coming into mainstream, do you see this replacing the traditional banks or complementing the traditional banking sector, or even larger financial sector, insurance and other products?
Right. And this is my personal view, right? From my experience looking at the developments in the fintech space as well as so far the virtual asset space, I don't think it will replace. And if you look at the controversy around Facebook trying to introduce a stable coin, you can first of all see the kind of concerns that the regulators have. So in the financial services sector, it's so heavily regulated. So I would think first and foremost, they want to make sure that if you were to come into the space, you have to be properly regulated. And the challenge for most of the tech vendors, those in the currently DeFi space, most of them I would say would be software developers whose mindset has never been tuned to that of a financial services firm. So for them to make that switch, to come from a place where buyers beware, have no liability, really you do it at your own risk, that kind of mindset, you probably will not be able to make the transition to the financial services space that easily. So you actually need to work with the financial institutions who have all the resources, know-how, and history of compliance behind that to help you transit. And at the same time, of course, the financial institutions that have not moved into the DeFi space, it makes more sense for them to quickly work with the innovators out there who has been leading in this space, right, to learn how to make use of DeFi. So I can only see this as the sustainable model going forward, and probably the one that regulators will become comfortable with.
So it has to be a much more collaborative approach between probably the traditional players, the new innovative players, and probably regulators at the middle of it.
Indeed, because theoretically, if you look at that's bifurcation argument here. It's a race. If it is a race between the DeFi vendors trying to move into the regulated space and competing with TradFi moving or adopting DeFi, who is going to win the race in the longer term? My gut is that the TradFi moving into the DeFi space will have the edge, but that is still not optimal, right? If you can bring the two together, I think the outcome will be a lot more.
I 100% agree with you, because while they may have the edge of knowing the industry and the knowledge, but I think they will probably miss the agility an ability to think out of the box that perhaps innovators bring on the table. So, while one more thing, we see a lot of quantitative tightening, and it looks like it's likely going to be there for a foreseeable few months, if not few years. How do you see this impacting fintech and the crypto industry?
In the short term, it will definitely have an impact, right? Quantitative tightening has definitely got that pullback in terms of investment activities. Right?
Yep.
And when you do that, I suppose the investors will be a lot more selective in choosing what to put their investments in. And just simply that, I'm sure a lot of the players who have been sort of going headlong into this headlong rush into this space will struggle to find investors. And of course, the recent turmoil doesn't help at all, right? The confidence among investors investing into the space, partly because it's largely unregulated. So when anything happens, there's a loss of confidence. So I think the near term quantitative easing, tightening will impact the investments into these activities. So there might be some slowdown. Of course, if you are quality, right, you will definitely still stand head and shoulders above the rest and you can distinguish yourself from the rest. But I'm thinking long term, the growth will be intact. The growth story will be intact. And I think I can see three main sources driving the growth, especially in the DeFi space. And one is the existing players, DeFi, actually embrace regulation, knowing that in order for them to eventually attract more clientele, attract more activities, that is the only way to gain investor trust. The second is new players who will see the opportunity to architect themselves to be compliant by design from day one. And that is a huge advantage compared to a lot of players, existing players who needs to pivot. And the third, and probably the most important in terms of traction, would be actually the TradFi moving into the DeFi space. Today, there's so much liquidity that is available in the traditional financial sector, but they are never going to be touching any of the cryptos and DeFi players at this point in time because of the regulatory uncertainty, all the financial crime that's happening and the fraud that's happening. So, but once you unleash that, you solve that piece of the puzzle, I think the TradFi pivoting into that space by demand of their clients, or they see the benefit from an efficiency standpoint, will be a huge fit boosting the sector.
Awesome. Why don't tell us, as being a regulator for most of your career, what would you see as the future of the regulator itself? How in next 5 or 10 years would we see the regulators structured the same way? Some supervision, some enforcement, some authorization, working with the same tools, or are we seeing a very different future? Because everyone seems to be talking about future of finance, but I'm sure with that comes the future of regulations and future of regulators. So how do you see the future of regulators?
Right. My eventual outcome is to have a regulator that's of course tech savvy.
Okay.
A regulator that is able to listen intently to the needs of the industry and to talk an attitude that you are willing to try unless things tell you otherwise. So that spirit, the innovation, the ability to try new things is something which I think the future of regulators should be looking at, because that's the only way for you to keep up with the fast emerging and fast changing landscape of technology-driven financial sector. And the experience that we have from our regulatory sandbox is indeed by getting our hands dirty, by trying, and only then can you understand and keep on top of things and make the right call and judgment. If you choose to sort of adopt a wait and see, there's always a risk that the industry may just bypass you, and all of a sudden you realize that you will lose your relevance as a regulator, or you're not in a position to even steer the direction, steer the future of how the industry will go. So I think one of the most important thing that regulators should look out for is to keep that open mind, be willing to experiment, get your hands dirty, and then from there continue, of course, to recruit the right talent so that you can make proper judgment call based on what you've done with the industry. You can have all the experiment going on, but if you don't have the proper people to make a sound judgment call, you get in trouble.
Well, last question while we have you here. If you can give any advice to the future generation who are aspiring to build their careers in the world of fintech or crypto, either being in the industry or either being in professional services or even being regulators, what would you advise them?
Well, my advice might not be the best, but I'm just sort of speaking from what I think is the path of least resistance, so to speak. If I were a programmer today trying to develop a product that is relevant to the financial services sector, it's going to be quite difficult because you really need a lot of institutional knowledge about how the financial services are.
Correct.
Whereas if I'm start off my career in the financial services sector, making the switch to technology might be easier, and that's because I understand how the regulated space works, and I'm able to perhaps tap on the vast resources out there in terms of the programming capabilities of the technology sector. Because if you approach it the other way around, right, you can have a technology background and to sort of move into the financial services sector space, you would have to first identify who should you be approaching in the financial services sector, which is itself a huge challenge, a huge maze, right? You can be looking at the compliance sector, you can be looking at back office space, you can be looking at the front office space, right? And that space is going to be a maze if you don't start off in the financial services sector. So my gut sense is that it's probably good to study something which is, of course, you can study computing, Python programming as part of your syllabus, but still sort of major in the finance. It's probably good for you to sort of move into the financial sector to begin with, and then after a few years of experience in there, explore moving into the technology. You probably have better market value. Right? That's my sense. May not be right, but that's.
No, I think, look, your experience is valuable. Like you said, I have a similar journey as yours. Started as an engineer, ended up in financial sector, but I think the times have changed, and I think it's important that our future generation also learns and understands what may not work. So thank you so much. That was a very valuable advice, and pleasure to have you on our show. It's been fantastic, and we look forward to seeing you and seeing ADGM crossing more and more boundaries and stretching the boundaries and making more and more innovation in the space and contributing to the financial sector.
Thank you.